The Struggling Artist Record Club is a vinyl record subscription service where I hunt and curate the best punk and punk-adjacent music out there and mail their record to your door each and every month. Imagine finding your new favorite band from across the country without ever having to leave the house. It doesn't get much better than that. The excitement of discovering new music just got that much easier. As a member of the Struggling Artist Record Club, you are going to receive some of the best music you've ever heard from bands you may never even heard of. Whether you've been collecting records for years or just starting out, the Struggling Artist Record Club is designed specifically for you. And right now, all new members get a Struggling Artist Record Club exclusive along with the monthly selection. So head to StrugglingArtistRecordClub.com, pick a membership, and start building that collection today. Well, there was there's problems in the music industry, and I'm like, I don't know what's gotten over me in the last couple years, but call it therapy, probably therapy. But I've been really vocal about things, and I know Calling All Crows worked with a friend of mine because she runs the Rock and Roll Rumble in Boston, and she uses this one venue, and so I know she's used Calling All Crows to kind of help train the staff and everything. And I don't know much about it. Obviously in my initial email, I really didn't know much about it. So can you kind of break it down, what Calling All Crows is? And then Here for the Music is that a division of it?
Yeah. So, Calling All Crows is a nonprofit that was started in 2008 by Chadwick Stokes, who's a touring musician. He's in Dispatch, Chad and the Pintos, State Radio, and Sybil Gallagher, who is his wife, but was also a tour manager for a long time. And essentially my understanding of how the sort of big moment was that they're both really social justice active people individually. And so essentially as Chad's bands were touring the world and getting bigger, they realized that they had the opportunity to speak directly to his audience and not only raise awareness of campaigns or projects that they were passionate about, but also assuming that fans of his music were also sort of a similar mindset to him. They thought, why not create an opportunity to essentially build an on-ramp to activism for these music fans who care about these things like we do, but maybe don't know where to even start or begin of how to make impact or change. So that's kind of the origin story of Calling All Crows. And each year since 2008, or every 2 years-ish, they've brought on a different campaign to focus on a different global or national issue. So they they worked with Oxfam to bring stoves to families in Sudan so that they could have access to better ways to prepare food. They worked directly with women and families who were impacted by incarceration to make sure that they had to fundraise to get them resources they needed for a few years. They also kind of bounced off of that to do a project to share stories of people who were incarcerated. So it's been kind of a full gamut of different issues, all with the central through line of feminism, social justice, and like I said, global impact. So Here for the Music is the longest running program. It started in 2017, inspired by what you were just saying, not only them witnessing harm happening within the music space, but also there was an incident of sexual harassment that happened within their own community, like at a show with a friend. And so they realized like we're like the people that people come to ask like, what do we do? And we don't even know what to do. So after sort of navigating that experience, they decided to create this program within Calling All Crows to essentially make it so that like knowing that this was going to continue to happen realistically, right? Like how can we make resources available so that bands, music festivals, venues, fans, like they're not having to reinvent the wheel or do all this research on their own every time, but instead could like have a place or have a person they could talk to about it. So my role at Calling All Crows is I'm the director of Here for the Music. So like I'm very much focused on raising awareness and preventing gender-based violence in music spaces in a myriad of ways.
Now, are you like boots on the ground? Like, are you not looking for, but like, are you involved in like the music world too? Like out there at the shows and kind of like guiding this whole thing, you know?
Yeah, in different ways. So like one of the sort of core elements of all of the campaigns has always been tabling at shows and going on tour with artists in that way, because essentially like the easiest way to talk to a whole lot of fans is setting up a space next to merch with like cute buttons and stickers and a message. So we have an awesome volunteer pool so that we can be everywhere all the time, all at once. But then also too, you'll see me actually at a lot of the festivals that we're at, just because that's such a heavier lift, and there's usually so much more involved with festivals versus tours. Particularly, I will go to fest sometimes and like actually facilitate a training for fans or for festival workers or whomever before the fest even starts. And so then, I'll hang out for the rest of the weekend. But yeah, so that's one huge way that we talk to people, we reach people, is by showing up to shows themselves. And then I'm also sort of in the background facilitating a lot of trainings, creating materials. Like right now I'm working on a tour code of conduct for like an entire music management company. Like they want to have one standard thing for all of their artists. And so that's the kind of work that I'm doing also, when I'm not just like gabbing at people.
So with that, excuse me, sorry. With that, so like, I don't know what kind of, like what genre of music you gravitate towards, but like, I know in like the punk rock community, there's been a huge issue over the last couple of years. Some of the bands, one of the biggest bands that was like advocating for women and feminism, had a issue within, a really bad issue within, and through there's been so much conflict, like, it obviously affected the women who were abused. It affected like the fans of that band who like believed in the statement that they had, you know what I mean? Do you like, how do you deal with things like that? Like, is there more than just like how do you, how does someone, I don't know, grieve through it? Like, how does someone get through one of these things? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so there's like a lot of questions in that question. I'm going to try to like get to all of them.
Yeah.
No, you're good. It's a good one. That's not, I don't want to miss anything. So, to answer your first question, yes, my whole, like, I was radicalized by punk rock as a teenager, to put it very simply.
Yeah.
And
as you should, right? As we all should. Yeah.
And that's like my whole like perspective or ethos on we can keep each other safe, and that it's really about community is all that's going to get us through this like slow motion apocalypse we're living through. All of that comes from punk. And like specifically, I grew up in Indiana, and the punk scene there was like very small, and shows were always getting shut down by cops. And so there was just this feeling of like, we have to band together. There's no other option if we want to survive. And I think I learned a lot from that, and carry that through today. So that's one part. And then in terms of like, there's so many different attitudes or like theories around, what do we do when someone who we love and we trust and we consume their art does something hurtful? Like, how do we respond to that? And I think I always come back to two main thoughts around that. One is like, one of the sort of core principles of like restorative justice, transformative justice, all of the brilliant, amazing, especially Black and disabled women who like built all of those principles. So much of it is like, step one is just stop, take a breath, slow down. Like, we as a society, but as humans, when we hear bad news, especially, like, we want to like jump feet first into action, and we want to like do something, and we want to fight and all this. And like, yes, all of that is going to happen, but what we can all do to mitigate causing more harm in our response is just like, stop, take a breath, and like deal with your own feelings about it first. And I guess even dialing back a little bit more, like, recognize that you have feelings about it, and like, that's okay. That's part of it, right? I think a lot of times, especially with like everything just like blowing up on the internet overnight, right?
Oh man, yeah.
There is like this resistance to like, I don't feel any conflict. I'm just mad. It's like, that's not real. Like, that's not how humans exist, right? So it's like, that's one thing I always like return back to, is like, okay, am I jumping in? Am I trying to flatten this issue in some type of way? And like, how do I deal with that? That's one. And two, like, the reality is, harm is going to continue to happen. Like, there's not, I mean, I very much am always trying to build the world I want to live in, but it's like, I also am firmly understand that like, this is going to be a problem forever, right? So instead of throwing 1,000% into everything, like, we have to think, okay, what can we do to reduce harm? What can we do to prevent this from continuing? What can we do to make sure that the person or people who were most impacted get what they need? Because that's the other piece too, right? Is like, we want to like, it feels more exciting to like go after the bad guy, like always. There's entire, movie franchises about it, but like we have to like again, pause and reframe and think like, oh, is going after the bad guy actually solving the problem, or is that just making me feel better? So like, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I think on it, like, in a much more, I guess I'll give, so I gave you like the big, like, dreamy, version of the answer. In a much more practical sense, like, I just like try not to give money to artists that are making art that or whose values don't align with mine, I guess. Right. Like, there are certain bands that I'm like devastated to not listen to on a daily basis on like Spotify. But like, if I've owned their CD since I was 16, I might pop it in when I'm feeling nostalgic, because my thought is like, the way I reduce harm is like, I'm not going to continue to like financially support them.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's just like, I don't know, one of a billion ways that you can do it. There's no right answer either,
Yeah. It's just, it's tough to see, like, especially like with, it's the whole like wolf in sheep's clothing. You know what I mean? Like they're just like, and if the message, and this is something I had said to a couple people, and please tell me if I'm wrong, like people that were like that were devastated by some of these things that had happened, and like, because the message that they put out in their music was the complete opposite, right? And I try to say like I mean, you know, you don't have to support them now, but just like those values you got from the music prior, like those are still yours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Music's subjective. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't have to support them anymore. You don't have to listen to it anymore. You know, but like just know, like, because like, and these are good people. These are people that like believed in these values, and that's why they're so distraught, because they don't know where to go from here. You know what I mean? I did notice on the website, like, it said, you know, it said some things about like let's see, yeah, outreach for mental health and resources as well. You know what I mean? So, like, I think, is there like, so is, and there's, you do a lot of stuff for fans as well as just like venues, and you know what I mean? So, like, is there outreach for that kind of thing? Like, kind of like a, I don't know, is it grief counseling? It's not, I don't want to call it what it's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I also don't want to blow it off either. So
Yeah.
how does, like, do you know, like, how can, like, resources where people can go to do that kind of like to try to talk it out or whatever, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of specifically that whole like, oops, my favorite artist just like ruined my perception of them. Like, I don't know that there's any specific resources that exist. That's such an interesting
But just like
thought.
in the fact that like if you install your own values off of like from a message that you got, and that's great, right? Especially
Yeah.
when it's a good message. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, but like just to kind of deal with the fallout of it all, you know, like it's just, I think about things like that. I think about things that, like, you know, like, I think about things what happens with the victims, because they're in this spotlight and they're getting a lot of hate from people who loved that music, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, whether it be like whether they're being called out for being a liar, or and that's something as as old as time. Victim blaming has been a thing that I can't stand, and I wish we could get rid of that. You know, is that something, like, do you guys work with that too at all, or like kind of like, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much there because one of the biggest like sort of cultural beliefs that's a misconception that I feel like I'm rallying against constantly is that people who cause harm, and like, asterisk, when I say cause harm, I guess I'm using that as like the widest umbrella to talk about like
Right.
any version of hurting someone, right? Physically, emotionally, whatever. But there is this misconception that like people who cause harm are like these like creeps lurking in the shadows, and it's really easy for us to separate ourselves from the creeps because no one wants to think of themselves as a creep, right? Like, I'm not that. I wouldn't do that. And also too, to separate like our friends and our family and the people we love from that perception, because again, like, they're not lurking around. They're not bad people. And the reason why I feel so strongly about addressing that is because that allows for more harm to happen when we can't even like hold our closest friends accountable. And so I think that's like, there's also this, what can happen sometimes is like the macro and the micro get like sort of flipped, like where it's like I have complicated feelings about holding my friends accountable. So then when I see this like huge artist do something, I'm gonna go in on them because I don't know them. And so I don't have like emotional connection to them. And in a way, it kind of can reinforce my own perception of like, well, I'm still doing something, right, about this issue, but I'm doing it in a way that's not gonna like blow back on me. And that's not, it's like, that gets really sticky, right?
Yeah,
Because like,
yeah.
the way that we make any kind of positive change is by like building our own community, and then also being the ones who address issues in our own community. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I just
No. I mean, because it's like you said, it's a sticky situation, and like, yeah, I think just talking about it kind of helps with it. You know what I mean? Like, helps like people take a better look at things, and you know, and I think I think it's tough too in the day of the internet because everyone has an opinion, which is fine, but then everyone has a soapbox now too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and whether it's right or wrong, like it doesn't that doesn't it gets lost in translation, I guess, a lot of the time too.
Yeah.
So I think like having an organization like this, and so do I call it Calling All Crows? Do I say Here for the Music? Because it's within it, right? It's like they're
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Here for the Music is a program of Calling All
Gotcha,
Crows.
gotcha, and that's what we're here for today. So cool. Yeah. So like I think things like this are important. I think so. Stop me if I'm wrong, but pretty sure what Angel had them come do. It must have been Here for the Music because it was for a venue, and it was to like train the staff on better ways to spot situations. Maybe is that okay? Yeah, can you get into that? Can you kind of explain that to me?
Yeah, so it's actually funny that that's sort of the reference point because that was moments into me starting this job.
Oh wow!
So I very much have that like top of mind because it was one of my first big projects I worked on. But so we came to the venue that was hosting the Rumble, and we did our sort of like signature Here for the Music training for venue staff, which has 3 main learning objectives. One is to, as you said, like recognize the spectrum of behavior all the way from totally benign, ignore it, it's fine, to like extreme physical violence. And we look at it that way as a spectrum because for a few reasons. One being that like no one behavior is inherently all the time great, all the time bad. It's just we have to think of it outside of that binary. And 2, typically things, if they're going to escalate, they escalate along that spectrum too. So it's like we're looking at it in a way to break down that binary, but also to recognize like this can become that. And that's important, especially for people working in spaces where a lot of people gather, is to recognize like, even though right now this looks fine, or looks kind of iffy, if I blow this off and just go back to what I'm doing, it might then become actually very much a problem.
Yeah.
So part of the training is to first like break that down, recognize that spectrum. Second, then give them actual tools for intervention that primarily stop the escalation while keeping them from being hurt too. So we follow bystander intervention principles, which you may have heard of as like the 4 Ds or the 5 Ds because they all start with the letter D. It's also the only proven, like I should say, research-backed, like proven intervention method to be effective at preventing harm, that is. So that's kind of where we're coming from with that. But the big picture of that is there are a few different types of intervention, and they're designed to be approachable for anyone. And kind of universal in terms of like you could insert most of those interventions into most situations and they'll probably work. Some may make more sense than others, but like the idea is I want to give you the most like multifaceted tool to address this very multifaceted problem, right? So like the 4 Ds are, first is, and these are in no particular order, it's just how I remember them. But first is direct, which is quite literally, I'm going to see a problem and I'm going to hit it head on, right? I'm going to say, hey, stop doing that thing, or hey, that person doesn't like this, back off, whatever that looks like. Obviously that requires a lot of like guts and gumption to do. It can be scary.
Yeah.
It's also important, and this is part of what we talk about in the training too. Think about like your sort of identity, your station, how you present yourself, and am I gonna make this worse?
Right.
right? Like as like if I'm like this kind of like big burly person with like an intimidating energy, maybe direct is actually not the best
Right.
method because
That should be the last line of defense.
right,
You
because
know?
like now there's a fight. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like that's something to consider too. So then the next is distract, which is I'll say my
Mhm.
personal favorite, where you are still going straight in, but you're doing it in a way that's a little less like
Charismatic. Using charisma.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
and that can look a lot of different ways. I think one example I hear of a lot, which is super easy, is like pretending you know someone. So going up to them and be like, "Oh my gosh, like Todd, weren't we in this class together or something?" You know, and then you give them the chance to take that sort of like life raft you're throwing them
Hmm.
if they want to. The nice thing about that too is if you're not totally sure of if like is everyone involved in this situation actually happy to be here or not, again you're throwing them a life raft, so if they don't want to take it they don't have to.
Hmm.
And you know the biggest risk there is like I don't know, you might get embarrassed. Like fine, you go
That,
on about your
that
life,
beats
right?
what could happen.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I mean? Yeah, yeah.
And then there's delegate, which is just asking for help. So
Hmm.
again, thinking of that, like the example of like if you're some big burly dude, maybe you tap your friend to go in for you, or you sort of like go with them because they have a much more like chill vibe and they might be received a little differently. So delegate is just like bringing in some outside help. And then delay is where you essentially kind of just like wait for the dust to settle a little and then go in
Right.
and say
Hmm.
something. Like that one I think is especially useful. Again, in those moments where you don't know the people involved, you don't know the situation entirely, or you walk in and it's already kind of like at a 10.
Hmm.
You wait for that to sort of happen, and then you approach them and say, hey, I overheard what they were saying to you. Like, that was weird. Are you okay? Like, any number of things like that. And similar to distract, like, you're throwing them a life raft. They can say yes or no that they
Hmm.
want your help. And I think to think about where someone who has experienced, like, sexual harassment or violence or is in an abusive relationship, like, it's so important to be able to give them some power back because those situations, those instances take power away.
Hmm.
So by being the person who is saying, not only saying, hey, I am here for you, but also only if you want me to be, has this two-pronged approach of like, I'm restoring some of your agency while also offering help.
Hmm.
And that's like so it's great. Again, this toolkit is so great because it's like you don't have to know any of that to be able to use these tools, right? Like you don't have to know how it impacts the brain of a survivor and all that. You
Hmm.
just have to know that it's like it's effective and it's designed to be easy. Um and you can still like have a really powerful impact on someone. And so then yeah, the last piece of this training is then what happens next? So we talk a little bit about like, okay, let's say you intervened and this person really does need your help. Like, what are some, ways you can de-escalate their crisis that they're in right now? Like, what are breathing exercises you can do with them to get them to like a good spot? Like, and things like that. So we kind of end with that note of like, how do we make like a whole wraparound response to what
Hmm.
happened. And then like the best case scenario is we also have like venue managers in the room who can say our policy says do XYZ, and so then it's like we know exactly what we're doing when we go into this.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And that's the training that you guys provide when you go to a venue and deal with staff and everything. So I when I looked online on the website, I mean, you guys have a lot to offer here. You have everything from like how people can volunteer to donating. So there's different avenues that people can take, right, to help. Can we talk about that stuff? Like you know what I mean?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, a lot of our work is just talking to people. And so we really heavily rely on our volunteers, especially also too, because we're a national organization and our staff is small but mighty. So we can't be everywhere. But yeah, so volunteering typically looks like tabling at shows. It can also mean going to festivals. It can also mean helping run service projects, and that is typically where we're already on a tour or something where we can attach it to an artist or a fest. And we might say, okay, when this artist is in Chicago, we're going to set up a service project in Chicago where, or actually, I'll give a better example. So last year, we did a service project in Boston where we brought in reproductive access organization to do kind of like a presentation about like what does it mean to be a pro-abortion advocate and things like that, and like what are we doing, and how can you help. So there was that piece, but then also too, like Chad and the rest of Dispatch came and did a couple of acoustic songs and also participated in the service project. So there's kind of this like these layers of incentive of like you get to do a cool thing, you get to volunteer for a couple hours in an afternoon, but you also might get to see a really exclusive little concert, or hang out with artists who you care about. And for that project in particular, we wrote thank you letters to abortion providers, which was very wonderful. And it was with Reproductive Equity Now was the organization. They're great. And so that's one aspect of volunteering sometimes, is doing service projects. And then other ways that you can support us is like if you run a venue or a festival, or if you are in a band or tour with artists, like you can reach out to me and I can do those trainings. I can also help you write your like policy and procedure. I can also just like point you in the direction of good resources. I think I'll speak for me, but I think also too, Calling All Crows as a whole, like my prerogative is just to make the music community better. And so I'm trying to do anything that I can to do that. And so like if anyone listening has sort of access to people or things that you feel like could benefit from these resources, like holler at me and we can talk about it and we can think about what would be the most effective approach. And with that too, like this year, for instance, we have another campaign called Voice Your Choice that's trying to connect people to local resources for reproductive justice. So we might be, depending on the state and the venue and all of the things, we might be like handing out Plan B at a show, or we might just be saying, hey, here's this really awesome organization that exists in your town already. Like, we'll have them there to table and to talk to you about what exists for you. So yeah, we're kind of like connectors. Like we would just want to like bring things to fans that they might not be able to access otherwise.
Now I see there's also on here, like there's a free music fan oriented sexual violence prevention and response training that's free online. You have a free toolkit, right, for people to grab that's on there, and it comes with all sorts of things in there. I was gonna download it to look at it, but I was like, I don't know if so. Is this like all right here? Because again, I get like I don't know what I'm doing half the time. So if I could just download this just to look at it and see if it's something that I could work with. It's not gonna like once I download it, like, hey, you need to go do this now, right? It's not one of those. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm old. I don't know the internet very well. I'm trying.
You're doing great. It's as much or as little as you want. I think like honestly, to that point though, something that I've really tried to remind folks of, like during trainings, during meeting, like any opportunity I have, is just like, sweep your side of the street is one way you can kind of put it. It's like, think about like, how can I make sure that the spaces I enter are better, right? And like, that's sort of the secret sauce, right? Of like, if we all have that shared objective, then it would drastically change how these spaces exist, because we would then collectively say, we're not going to allow for like jerks to be in these spaces. We're not going to let it slide when people say or do things that are blatantly like discriminatory. Like we're not going to sort of like allow that stuff to continue to happen in the shadows. We're setting the standard together. So that's something I think is important on so many levels, but especially knowing that it feels so overwhelming sometimes to like distill everything into something is just like, yeah, just try to do what you can do. And that is positive. Like that will lead to good outcomes.
And then there's an open letter to the music industry that they can sign. Is that like a petition? Is that what that kind of like the petition to something or?
Yeah. So our goal with that was, when it first started was to, just kind of use it as a way to raise awareness, like a tool to just educate more people on, what is the standard of the music industry as far as like training, prevention, response measures, and then what we wanted to see change. And now, it's kind of morphing into, well, it's continuing to be that, but also to what I would like to see happen is, for us to start getting the number of signatures equivalent to like a major tour. And then we could kind of talk about it in the sense of like, if you imagine the number of people who went to see this entire awesome tour all think that this needs to change. And I think that like we're getting there in terms of like artists are also starting to speak out about this too.
Yes.
So the letter has existed for a while, but I feel like it's sort of morphing and changing as like the conversation is getting more common than it was when it started.
That's good. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So like, how do like, what? I mean, outside of like these trainings, it's like what in the 4Ds, right? We have the 4Ds. Like, what can people spot? Like, how do people in the music communities like to kind of shed more light on this? Like at a smaller level. Like, how can someone like they can just go? I mean, they can be a volunteer, right? And then talk to people about things. But how do we kind of shed more light on it? Like, because like it's. I think there's more light shed on it now than ever, and I will say the internet has something to do with that. It's not the internet; it's not all evil, you know. But like, I know for years everything got swept under the rug.
Right.
But like, let's talk about more like locally within communities of music communities. Like, how do we kind of spotlight this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so. I'm out here doing this on this like big national scale. There are also a couple of smaller scale organizations doing similar work. And so like if that exists where you live, like get on that train as well, because like again, this is a community-wide problem that is going to need a community-wide solution to fix, right? So so I'll think of it like in two ways, like big picture, small picture. Big picture, things like that. Like volunteer with local orgs, educate yourself, like know what is happening and what, you know, we're advocating around. Those kinds of things, always great, right? Be like a citizen of the world in that way. On a smaller scale, like so much of the reason that sexual harassment happens is because someone was given the impression that was acceptable behavior in the space that they were in, right? I think it's important to really emphasize that, like, violence is a choice that someone makes. And to your previous point about, like, victim blaming, it's like, when we really understand that violence is a choice, it actually makes it harder to victim blame because it sort of reframes it, right? Of, like, this person just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time because this other person made a decision. And so we also can see throughout like all of the research that's been done about sexual violence that it is a gradual building that happens. And there's like one resource I use a lot is called the rape culture pyramid. It's been around for years and years and years. as a prevention educator, like it's a hugely important tool. But essentially, it organizes this to make it make sense, that escalation. So like in the bottom layer of this pyramid, the foundation of this is things that we probably are honestly trained to kind of ignore for like self-preservation a lot of times, like sexist jokes or really discriminatory like work policies, or things like artists who have been publicly accused of harm still continuing to like make music and stuff, like all of that sort of at the foundation. And then that's what gives someone the idea that like, okay, this community, this space is okay with this on one level. Then after that, and especially if they get a little more power, then they can start to see like, oh, I can do some of those things and get away with them. And it never starts with like full-blown assault. Like it always is this like gradual. So all of that is to say, if your friend makes a horrible like sexist joke, like don't laugh at it. Like it really is. Like
down immediately.
Say something about it, you know, and like be willing to take that risk of like being the bummer in the crew because you're not gonna laugh at those things. Like that's really what I think, if anyone could do any one thing, is like try to address those things when they happen, because then you're sending that message that like this isn't okay. We don't allow for this. We're not cool with that. And then hopefully it doesn't continue to escalate after that.
Now, do you guys have chapters of like in different cities or anything like that, or is it just there's like one and then you guys spread out and go where you got to go?
Yeah, we're everywhere. We have volunteers across the country. Because we started in Boston and like Chad and Sybil still live in Boston, like we definitely have a really solid crew there. But we're all over the place. We also have, I feel like I have to plug that we have some trainers who I actually helped like build up to be able to facilitate these workshops as well, and they're across the country. And so part of that is so that like I'm not the only person that's going out and doing those, but part of it too is because I am a firm believer that like change happens within the community. So like I wanted there to be people in different parts of the country who knew that town, like who knew that the venues in that city, who know, hopefully like dreamiest situation, they recognize some of the people who show up to the trainings because they're like in the music scene together, like because that's a big way to influence change too.
So I did notice some of the artists on your guys' website that you work with. Now, do you tour with them? Are those the artists that you all tour with?
Yeah, sometimes.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes we do tour with them, and sometimes we just try to pop up at shows when we can.
Yeah.
It just depends. I've also done trainings for artists and touring crews before they hit the road, so that like their whole crew understands like what is the sort of expectation on the road, and what do we do if people aren't following those guides, like how do we address it when it happens, like all of that kind of stuff.
That's good. That's really good. See, I'm somebody that like I didn't know this stuff really existed, and I'm happy that it does. I'm happy that we have these trainings, especially because like when it's so you take like the music community, right? Like you can't, someone who does this kind of work but like in a different world, like sometimes that's not going to translate well into music, right? Into the music world, or into any. If you take a person from this community and puts them over in a different kind of community, and like they're trying to like teach them something, like, you know, sometimes it's going to fall on deaf ears. So having people that are involved in that community already to do these things, I think helps tremendously. So also, like, I don't know how, again, I've worked in bars and like venues most of my life. Yeah, I'm out of that now because I'm an old man, but I still go to them. And like, a lot of the things I did, like I would train like the security staff, and the 4Ds is like something kind of I'm familiar with, not like in the term, like not with the title of it, but like that's how I would teach security people to spot things. You know what I mean? Like kind of like
That's awesome.
yeah, it was just like something that came natural to me. And like I was good at that stuff. And so like seeing that, I'm like, oh, cool. Like I kind of know a little bit of this stuff and I want to learn more. So I go to the website and I'm like, oh, there's a toolkit. I can kind of take a look at that. I can take a free training. And then, you know, if I have the time, I can click the volunteer button, get involved that way too. And I think that's awesome. And I think I encourage people who are listening to this to do that, get involved, right? It can be scary to want to get involved in something because you don't necessarily know how to do it. But I think there's like a step-by-step guide here that will show us how, you know?
Yeah.
With that said, so like when you go, how do you go to a venue? Like what happens if someone says, hey, we want you guys to set up a booth here, you know? Like how does that work? Like do you have to do like not logistically, I guess, but like kind of break that, like do you guys just show up, or do you have to like schedule it, or you got to make sure you can get there, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it depends a lot on like the venue and the artist. So for instance, if we want to tour with an artist, we will really, really encourage them to do the training, because for a lot of reasons, but like a big one being that if we're going to be out here tabling for you, like we want to be able to tell your fans that like you're so committed to this that you also took this training, right? Mm-hmm. Like that, to the point of building the world we want to see. Like in a way, that's a way artists can build the shows they want to have, right? Is mm-hmm. by also knowing, like being exposed to that education, right? And then that way they can also encourage their fans to do it too. And that can maybe even become like what the tell of like a really good fan isn't just, do you know every word to every song, or do you have all the like cool merch, but it's also like, do you actually like care about the other people in the room and like mm-hmm. want to build this community together. And I think that like when we show up, honestly, like so far, knock on wood, venues have been super supportive.
I just want to say you have two wooden doors behind you and you knocked on your head.
Listen, I'm from the Midwest. I'm full of bad jokes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get off track. Go ahead.
But yeah, so far venues have been super supportive. So a lot of times, like sometimes we work through the tour manager, and that's like, I think, sort of an unsung hero of so much of the work we do is like tour managers are already doing so much. And then if we're working with an artist, they also then have to like help us get acquainted with the venue and like connect us to the right people and all that. So like shout out to tour managers. But yeah, so usually we just kind of reach out to the venue and say, this is who we are, this is what we do. We want to set up a table next to merch. Can you give us a fold out, like a card table and some chairs? Mm-hmm. We'll do the rest. So the nice thing too about the way our approach broadly is that it is super, super like DIY, like simplified. So we want to be able to essentially just show up to a place and have everything we need. Mm-hmm. My trainings are the same way. Like the online training is like very polished, professional, like great visual aids. If you see me do it in person, I literally will have like a big poster where I'm writing things on and a couple of little random things. Like I really want to be able to just like throw down my soapbox and get on it and go. Mm. So we try to keep that sort of DIY ethos with anything we do.
That's awesome. Well, let's change gears just a little bit. Let's talk about you, Maggie. You have an MSW, which I had to look up because I again, I'm dumb. So, that's awesome. And that having that, like you, with the job you have with Here for the Music, you design all these programs, right? Everything.
Yeah, so the person who created Here for the Music built a lot of the foundation, I'll say, and I've since being in this particular role for the last 2 years, have been building onto that / creating new stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think with that too, my like why I'm even here is because, as I mentioned before, like long history of being involved in the punk scene and DIY music and things. But with that, all of my jobs starting at 15 were in the industry. I've had pretty much all of the jobs you can have within the service industry, restaurants, coffee shops, all of that, bars, venues. So that's kind of where I started to understand that world. And then I also, when I was 20 years old in college, started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter for women in my college town. Shout out to Middleway House in Bloomington, Indiana. And I did like the hotline. I also volunteered in the shelter, like would hang out and be in the space with the people staying there. And then I also eventually did crisis response to the hospital. So when someone would go to the hospital because they'd experienced assault or violence, at the hand of a partner or whatever, I, as an advocate, would show up with 40 plus hours of training of like how to support them, but also like legit tangible resources for them. So I did that for years and years. Even when I moved to Chicago after college, I continued doing that here. And so all the while working in bars. So it was kind of like I had this like bisected two worlds. And so the deeper I got into social justice work and advocating against gender-based violence, the more I was seeing it in the nightlife industry. And it kind of slowly became this thing I couldn't ignore. And it became something where I was like going to my boss and saying, hey, I learned about this training. Can we do it here? Or, hey, our policy doesn't have a line item for harassment. And we know that our servers are experiencing it. So like, what are we going to do about it? Like I was like becoming really obnoxious.
Jeez.
So then eventually I realized like going to grad school was going to kind of just like get me into like more of those spaces and get me to be the one who was doing giving the trainings, which I ultimately wanted to do. So that's how I landed in in my master's in social work and how I found my way here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love Chicago. I've only been once and I had the best time.
When did you come? Like what for?
I went out there for a wedding. My buddy's dad was getting married, and so we drove out there, and we were there for like a week. We had like an Airbnb. This was back when that was like first starting, so it wasn't very expensive. But I had a blast. We went to this. I don't know. They called it the Triangle. Okay, yeah. There's some bars out there and stuff. Yeah, we went there and we did some fun. I don't know. What's your favorite like Chicago based food?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Also, I'm going off of your profile where it says to ask you about Chicago. So that's
here's the thing about people who live in Chicago. They're obsessed with Chicago, and so they will talk to you about it. I'm no different. My favorite Chicago food. Okay, so I'm gonna be a bummer and say that I'm vegetarian. So like I cannot, or I choose not to partake in like the delicacies that are the Chicago hot dog. And a lot of like pizza is amazing. Duh. Like, come on. That's like saying like water is wet. Like we know pizza's great. I think the thing I will say about Chicago is that like I can try so many different types of food in a 10-minute drive, right? Or like taking a train for a half hour, I can be exposed to like every type of food on the planet. And that is probably like the best thing about Chicago. Also too, it's like there are restaurants that have Michelin stars that also like I've literally seen bartenders on the bar like taking shots, like standing on the bar. Like so I think that's something that's really unique, and I love traveling and eating and going out, and it's like that's something that I do think is pretty Chicago, is that like you can go to the same place and have the most outrageous meal you've ever had, and then like there's a party at the same time. And that's something I think is really special.
Chicago's a really good spot for music too.
Yeah.
So when I being in New England, like I think of like the Boston music scene, but I call it New England as a whole because there's a lot of good bands from like Maine and in New Hampshire. But like the two other hubs that I love music like the most in is Seattle and Chicago. Chicago in the people I've met through this podcast that are in Chicago too, they're just like, and their bands are so good, like Blind Atom in the Federal League and Radar, you know what I mean? Like these bands are so good. So, you guys, it must like a lot of these bands do a lot of good things. So, I don't know if you're familiar with any of them, but maybe I can get them because since you're there, this program is there, right? Obviously, so maybe I can get them involved with you guys too. That would be awesome. Because like I think more awareness is better than no awareness, right?
Yeah.
Like you can never have too much awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's like ultimately that's step one, right? If we want to like make change, we have to get people to understand the problem, but also like what are we working towards. So yeah, absolutely. I think I also like am the first one to admit that like because I exist in this very niche sort of like intersection of the Venn diagram that I lose sight sometimes of like I'm like, yeah, everybody knows about this, but it's really not that as widespread as I think it is. So yeah, I think that's like truly why I love being invited to talk to people and like podcasts and interviews and things like that is because like we're only able to reach the audiences that we can reach, and I want more people to know about this. I especially really, really want more men to know about this because like not only do they represent a big population of people who cause harm? Like, let's just be so for real.
Yeah.
But also, like, they are the friends who can say, that joke's not funny. Like,
Right.
They are the friends who can be like, hey, I actually don't listen to that band anymore because I found out all their lyrics were about 16-year-olds, like, whatever. Like, that's, like, so critically important, too.
How does somebody, I'm a giant human being. Like, how do I approach these things and not because I feel like I have to like talk like when I I have like my normal voice and then I have like I call it the mom voice, like when you meet someone's mom you kind of talk down or you know what I mean, and you put a little like how do I get involved in this without people thinking like I guess I'm just like I don't want people to think like I'm like a bad person, you know what I mean, when I try to do these things, you know what I mean? So like
no, yeah.
I don't want people to like be sketched out by me, I guess.
Right.
That's what I'm getting at. Is there any kind of like things you could give me like pointers or whatever?
Yeah, that's so the first thing that Kate, like as you were saying that, I immediately remembered this really awesome quote from Anthony Bourdain that I think about a lot, where he was like talking about working in kitchens and things and how like the really messed up stuff he would see or hear like in those spaces, and how he had a realization at some point in his like long career that not being the dude who was saying that messed up stuff didn't make him the good dude, right? Like it was like you actually have to go farther than that. Like you're just as much of the problem if you're just sort of letting it slide. And I think that like, I mean, he was incredible for so many reasons, but I think that's such an important thing that I think a lot of folks probably maybe need to hear too, is like, that's not enough to just not be the asshole. Like there needs to be a little bit more than that. But I guess to your question of like, how do I do it and not, I don't know. Do you really think you're that intimidating? I don't know.
I sometimes I'm being all vulnerable about it. Yeah. Cause like, it's like this, like there's people who like, again, we've seen it, where people are like pretending to be something that they're not, you know what I mean? So like when someone just looks at like someone like me, like how do I say, hey, I'm an ally, like I'm here to help, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do we do that without sounding like a complete liar? You know? Or I guess
Yeah.
maybe you should tell me that off, so we don't want people that are liars to hear the method. But like, do you know what I'm saying though? Like I want people to know that like, hey, you're safe around me, and I'm gonna make sure, because that was my biggest thing with working in bars. I used to give this speech like the reason why I always got a job in a bar, because especially with like security, I'm like, hey, like there's a difference. I don't call it like, they're not customers, they're guests. And like I had this whole thing, like I created a training guide for like guest service and like how you approach these things and how do you talk to people. And like and one of the big things is just how you like introduce yourself. That's one of the big ones I always said, like, don't be like, give me your ID, introduce yourself and ask for it. You know what I'm saying? And then be like, if you have any issues, like don't hesitate to come get me. You know what I mean? Like that kind of a thing. But like, that's, to me, like that's a working thing. So obviously people should feel more safe about that with a working environment. But like, if I'm just going to shows and like, I want people to know, like, hey, I'll be okay. I mean, I think people around here know me enough, but like, you get what I'm saying? Like, how does somebody who's nervous about that, like, approach it and be like, hey, like, I can help,
Yeah, I mean, if I may, at the risk of sounding kind of like harsh, but it's like, really the key is like, don't just talk about it, be about it. So it's like, show people that you're like a safe person to be around. And I think, lean on some of that stuff that you were just talking about, of like, how do I give the energy that I am like approachable or whatever. Like, I think I guess I think about it in the sense of, I feel this is a sweeping statement, but I feel like it's true. Like, any femme person who likes metal or hardcore or punk sometimes too knows what it feels like to put on the armor to go to a show, because they already know they're maybe going to be the only one in the room, or one of two or three, or they're going to be looked at sideways because they like don't look like everybody else, like and that is to say, I guess I should expand that too, like, not just my experiences being like a white woman in these spaces, but also you could expand that to say like people of color in these spaces, people with disabilities, anyone who doesn't like kind of fit the like typical idea of who's at those shows, knows what that feels like, to like, how do I hold myself so that I'm actually projecting, don't talk to me, like, don't mess with me.
Yeah.
I'm not friendly.
I think respecting that space too is a big thing, right? Like, if you see that, and you don't have to, like, if someone attempts to like be like, hey, just let you know, like, if the other person doesn't want that, respect that. Don't try to keep explaining yourself, because then you're gonna look a little crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like, think about that. Like, I think even just to your point of like the power of knowledge, of awareness, right? Is just like, there may be, I'm sure that there is someone who's listening to this interview who's going to think like, wait, like, the women in my life like do that? Like, they have to put on armor? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And so just, I think like maybe a step towards like being a better, I don't know, like participant in the scene, I guess, it's just like, think about that. Like, think about what the people around you are thinking about or doing or whatever. And like, how do I feel about that? It does it bum you out to think that like your friends feel like not totally safe in the way that you do? Like, okay, well, what do you want to do about it? Like,
That's awesome. Yeah. Good answer. Thank you. Yeah. We'll use that one. All right, before we wrap up here, I got one more question for Maggie, for you. What is your favorite Dolly Parton song, and is there a wrong answer?
Oh, there's absolutely no wrong answer. Come on. Slash, I don't even know that I could give a good answer, because it's like, it changes so often. For those of you who haven't read my entire bio, I do say I love to talk to you.
I told you I did my research. You
did. And I left myself open for this question. Dolly Parton is one of my, it's like, I can't even say she's my favorite artist, because she's like one of my idols, like favorite human people.
Yeah, she's a great human being, you know? Yeah.
and like her whole story is just so incredible and inspiring. I really The other thing I love about Dolly Parton is like a lot of her songs are really sad, but because she has that like high pitched voice and like makes great pop songs, you don't realize that you're singing to like this most devastating story.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess if I had to okay, I'm being obnoxious and that I'm trying to skirt the
Would it help if I just blurted out mine first?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Jolene.
Jolene is your favorite. That's a popular one. People love that song.
Yeah, I like that song a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I like the covers of it too. Like I think the song's so well written, anybody can perform it. I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Beyonce cover?
I don't think I've heard that one. Yeah.
I'm shocked. You gotta.
I'm gonna have to now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's your homework. Go check that out. Jolene, yeah, is a crowd favorite forever. I Will Always Love You. Amazing. Always good. It's devastatingly good. I think there's a song that this is like, I think honestly my favorite might be, I can't remember if it's called Here I Am or if that's just what the chorus, and so that's why I think it's called that. But it's really just about like showing up, and like you could say it's a love song, but I honestly think it's just like a song about like the people who you love. Like it doesn't have to be like your partner. It's just like the lyrics are something to the effect of like, if you need anything, here I am. Like not only like, it's like, you don't just have to call me. I'm already here for you. And it's just, I think about it, or I listen to it a lot. And so I guess if I had to say one favorite, it's probably that.
Okay. Right on, right on. Now, as we wrap up, where can people go for more information, to if they want to volunteer or just see what you guys are all about, and social media? Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah. Anything about us is going to be at Calling All Crows. So our website is callingallcrows.org. Here for the Music has a page on there. It's easy to find. And then same thing with all of our socials. I'll say our Instagram is our most well used. That's what we update the most. And so I'd say if you're going to start anywhere, start there for sure.
Right on, right on. Anything that I missed that you wanna touch on?
That's a great question. No, I guess I'll just like reemphasize, like we all have the power to make our scene better, and so it's just a matter of like deciding you're gonna do it. So do it.
All right. Maggie, thank you so much for doing this. I was super nervous walking in. Usually it's the guest who's nervous, and I get them to warm up. You've gotten me. I opened up. I'm a complete open book now, thanks to you. I appreciate you doing this. Yeah.
Glad I could help. I mean, here's the thing about me. I'm a yapper, so I should have warned you. But I'm glad. I'm glad that you opened up.
Thanks.